The
Hey.
stage is all yours.
Super. Well, thank you. I'm thankful to be back with you all. It feels like it's been a long week since last week, but to share and learn, and also honored to help launch what I think is a really important community. Um, I think when we ask people to submit questions and coming together, one of the things that we hear is that people want a sense of community. They want a sense of shared, not just co-regulation, but how do we feel connected to each other when the world is feeling remarkably disconnected right now? And as a species, we need that. We need that belonging, but not belonging so much in a way that we've understood it before, but a belonging in that there is a group of people that you can trust explicitly, that you have the same vision and purpose and mattering. And I think in that way, that's why this group is such a critical and important catalyst for change right now. So also, like Swati was saying, we really want the group to be dynamic and interactive, and for the communication to be very circular. So I would love for you to invite questions or share personal examples, because we're here to co-regulate, and to build cohesion and trust really as change makers in the circle. And I know I can't really see all of you, so I'm trusting on Swati and Suzanne to help me if somebody has a question, but please stop me if somebody has a question, and happy to kind of go and flow in that way. It would be super helpful for all of you online if you have questions as we go, to populate it in the chat. And also, if you're sitting in the circle and a question is burning in your mind, I don't want you to forget it. So I would love if you just want to send Swati a note, and then she'll send it to me as well. Because what I would love to do is sort of interweave it, so that our brain can build and scaffold, so we can remember the knowledge better, versus more of a popcorn kind of question and answer. It's better for our brain to make a cohesive thematic kind of mental model. So if we can and do that, that would, I think we'll have a really great discussion today. Is that okay? Can you all hear me really well? We okay? Amazing.
Yes. You know what? So like this, you get a sense. I'm going to just do a quick. I'm just going to take the computer so you can actually see the people. I mean, you know
That's
how we do
helpful.
it. Yes. So.
Hello, hello. Amazing.
Makes sense. Oops. How? Like this? Okay.
Some of us are definitely co-regulating. We're getting closer. Hi. Amazing. Oh, I wish we were there with you. Great. Hi. Amazing. I also hear it's rainy season too, huh?
This gives a sense of, okay, so now you've seen everyone. And for those online, if you are in a position to be seen, I think would be great to have also your video on. So like this, we can really truly be a circle and see everyone.
Amazing. And all their family. Hello, Sophie.
Yes.
Amazing. Super. Well, what I love a bit about, if I can just start with the invitation that we sent out, there was a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said, "It isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it." And I love that, because I think that's why we're all here, to work at it. But I would add that my favorite quote to this one, and I bet it's most of you in the room too, but it's by Rumi. And I try to live by it every day. But he said, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. And today I am wise, so I am changing myself." And I think that that's our call to action today, is to come together to co-regulate, but to understand that the change is more than how we normally articulate the change begins with us, right? Because when we say the change begins with us, we often try to change things externally. We try to be a change maker, versus understanding that if we are the change, if we are co-regulating the change, the ripple effect is much more profound. If we understand the power of our species as a social co-regulating species, then we understand how to use that gift in a very profound way. So I do want to kind of back up just a bit, because I think most of you I saw last week, but just in case, please go back and watch the session online if you missed it, because I did give some key neuromyths and brain body understandings that are really important for us as a foundation to build on. But just in case we didn't meet, just to share a brief context of why I'm excited to be a part of this group, because like you, this is my life's work. And I have felt it is my purpose from the time I can remember, which is really working to build resilient systems and really to lead fundamental shifts in societies. And so my journey was personal, like most of us here, to understand how to heal my own childhood trauma, my early brain wiring and rewire, and then really to study individuals who committed acts of mass violence, trying to understand how do we prevent it? How do we work proactively? How do we support neural development in those key early years when we are forming who we will be as adults, right? And to be honest, I was grappling with, I know it may sound strange, but how do you grow superhumans? How do we create future resilient societies where it's generations of peacemakers and change makers? So when they're forming who they will be as an adult, 0 to 7, we're pretty solid at the age of 7 in our emotional regulation and our habitual ways of responding. So our habits of response and the way in which we regulate our emotions and interpretation to our world, we have co-regulated with the adults in our world and developed by the age of 7. So if we understand that we want to work not just reactively with the adults, but also to work proactively, how do we create, adults of the future by working on them now when it's critical, who don't pass on biases and belief systems and violence or harm. So Susanna and I were talking yesterday. Yeah.
Rebecca, I have just before you continue, I just wanted,
Yes.
because I think you said it very quickly, but just
Yes.
also to come back and put in context of the work that you've been doing with actually people who are committing crimes and murders. And so I think that's important to, as again, we're in this state of a bit of hopelessness, that your work actually has gone into studying those people who are committing the most atrocious crimes. So maybe you can just, before we go into the session, maybe just talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, absolutely. So I actually started in studying young adolescent children who committed acts of mass violence. So very bright intellectual individuals who were committing school shootings, mass violence, and trying to understand what it is that causes those situations and could we mitigate it before it happens. And so spent about 9 years studying environments, so school environments, lots of, we could talk forever about the research, but if you message me, I'll send you all the research, but what are those environments where we can actually mitigate what we know happens when children grow up with adversity? So we call it adversity, but when we're growing up in an adverse situation and our brain is interpreting our world as trauma. So I want to make that very clear, because in the brain, and this is important for us now, there's no such thing as trauma light. So we like to categorize things because it helps us understand our emotional reaction to the world. But stress and trauma in the brain is stress and trauma in the brain. It has the same effect, and it has the same inhibitory consequences on development of the brain and on functioning of the brain. And so the understanding is, if we know that at this point, a good portion of the world is growing up with adverse experiences, whether it's poverty or divorce or war, it's still in the brain trauma, and it's still stress, and it still causes dramatic differences in function and early neural wiring in the brain. And so it can oftentimes be very hard to reverse that once someone's brain functioning and neurological development and structure is remarkably different by the time they're an adult. And so we're asking them to do things like take perspective and have empathy, but those aren't neural connections that they developed. And so to understand that, not to say to scare us, but we're always neuroplastic. Whew, there's hope, but it's hard. And if we understand that, it's very important to be able to work towards ourselves. So it's a very long story of how I ended up in the Western Balkans with UNICEF and the World Bank right now. But I work with post-war countries, most recent post-Civil War countries, where multiple groups are now having to learn how to co-govern and how to cooperate and live. And developed a framework with Johns Hopkins that we've been implementing for about 5 or 6 years. So trained over 3,000 teachers, parents, caregivers, professors, coaches, government leaders, you name it, anybody who will talk to me, but training them. And really, you're getting a touch of it now, but understanding the power of co-regulating and the neuroscience of the power of what we are as species and our responsibility as adults on how to break the cycle and how you do it by living that co-regulation, because we are regulating. It's not about the books we teach. It's not about the stories we tell. It's about how we're modeling and co-regulating off of each other as a species. And the most important thing we can do is decide to be different as an adult so that we can create massive ripple effects within the communities. So I don't know if that's a good enough explanation for what we do, but what I would like to kind of touch on today is just scratching the surface of what we do teach and talk about, which is the power of knowledge. If we understand how our brains and bodies work, then we can better regulate our own selves so that we can help and understand the power of co-regulation as a species with others. So we're not different from bees and birds and all the other species who co-regulate through vibration and electricity and language and sound. We are the same. I think we like to pretend that we're more independent than we are, but we actually desperately need each other in order to regulate our nervous systems. And so I'm going to actually talk about that today. Which is, what is the understanding for how do we begin to see people differently? And I don't mean just see people differently. So yes, as Swati's saying, I have people who sit across the table and have a real reason to hate the other person. You know, a real reason to say, you killed my father, you raped my mother. I don't want to sit at the table and talk to you, right? I don't want peace. So it's not an ethereal thing. We're talking about concepts that are hard for the human brain to understand how to regulate its own nervous system so that it can find higher cognitive functioning. It's not impossible, but it takes us making real decisions about what we care about for ourselves and what we care about for the future. And so that's kind of where the context of what I'd like to talk to you about today is. It's not ethereal. This is the work we're doing with people who are really taking bold steps to try to heal generational trauma and to try to heal very fresh 8-year war wounds and to recover for the future. And the one thing I think Swati and I have talked about before too is the brilliant unlock for people is if you can get them to see each other as a human, because the othering, the stories in our mind and the disconnect from the social media and the stories we've been told about these people make us separate the fact that we're actually exactly the same. We're human beings. And when we have that disconnect from our own regulation and that disconnect from understanding each other as human beings, that's when we can begin to desensitize and dehumanize ourselves from our own species, right? And so I think that's kind of the foundation for what I would love for us to talk to as well. So started with that, and that led to a 20-year wormhole of cognitive and behavioral science research and studies, developing frameworks and tools. But Suzanne and I actually talked yesterday, and she gave me the courage to share. But during that time, I actually also became critically ill. And it is important, some of the tools we're going to teach and talk about, that when you are a highly sensitive individual, or you are a healer, or someone dedicated to really transformation, you tend to take on, Susan and I were talking about, you tend to be more of a porous individual. You tend to be more of a sponge. And what happens is that impacts you cellularly. And so I became very ill with taking on the stress and the trauma, because that's what's happening to us now. Whenever we are seeing and hearing someone else's trauma, our brain fires little electrical and chemical pulses and reminds us of our own trauma, and we relive it again. And if their story is similar to ours, or revives those feelings that we experienced, then our brain will make a story that trauma is actually currently our own. That's how people are so easily and quickly gathering into this community think of someone else's grievance is now my own. So it's a beautiful thing that helps us have empathy as a species, but it's also double-sided, and that we can very quickly begin to believe things that aren't true for us, and very quickly begin to believe we are part of a group and we should do things to harm others, simply because we've taken on a trauma that is in our mind very real to us, right? So I think that's kind of a bit of what I want to touch on as well. So the things we're going to talk about were an intense search of healing for myself. And that's what led to the neurobiology work and the postdoctorate work at Johns Hopkins. So all of the things that have lumped into one framework stemmed from not just peace and healing and post-violence, but also understanding how the power of healing starts with our own neurobiology, starts with our own regulation of self and others. And really trying to unravel, how does our brain develop? How do we learn? How do we regenerate? How do we mitigate harm and damage and encourage our own adaptive growth? How do we encourage an inoculation of sorts, right? How do we become not immune, but how do we become so good at regulating ourselves that instead of regulating to others' trauma, we become the peace that helps them regulate out of their own? And I think that that is a powerful tool that I could talk for months about, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So I picked two that I think are really important for us to talk about today. But when the body regenerates and the brain regenerates, I want to say that we are remarkably adaptive as human beings. We are beautifully designed. It's a miracle when you unpick all the tiny little intricacies that we are as an operating unit. But we are remarkably designed to regenerate and to restore and to grow and to heal ourselves. We're doing research right now at Harvard where we are able, with constant stimulation of the vagus nerve and your parasympathetic, and we can talk about that later, but that's what's happening when you're doing the chant and when you're doing grounding or you're doing certain breathing techniques. What you're doing is you're stimulating the vagus nerve, and it's your information highway between your brain and your body. So even when we talk about chakras and things as our energy centers, yes, because your brain is this massive operating unit, and it talks to all of its other subunits in those points, and they reconnect to the highway in those points. So the points at which we say are our energy centers have massive amounts of chemical and electrical energy, because that's where all of your organs map into your vagus nerve, your root. You have a stem from the stem of your brain all the way to every major organ, and it's your information highway. And so what we found is, if we can continually keep people in the parasympathetic, if we continue to keep people in that state of rest and digest is what we call it, or tend to yourself and to befriend others, then they are able to stop grand mal seizures. We're able to stop post-traumatic war flashbacks, able to even begin to regrow brain matter that has been lost. So the understanding and the hope for us is that not only are we remarkably regenerative, but that we can, by co-regulating, create that healing in others. So that's the hope for us. I am going to talk a bit about what's happening in our brain and body, but hopefully I'll get us out of stress by co-regulating that. There is great hope for neuroplasticity. So what I would love to do is invite us to hold as our context for today is how do we, as Rumi said, how do we change ourselves? How do we begin to help ourselves form new insights? How do we rewire our own brains and adapt, heal our own brain-body dysregulation? Because that's where the ripple effect power is. And I think what we're all experiencing these days is that it is extremely difficult to regulate our nervous system, particularly because we're co-regulating with the trauma and stress of others. I hear often, and no matter what tools I have, meditation, the psychosomatic breathing techniques, journaling, grounding, you name it, things aren't working. People are in deep hypercoactive trauma loops. And the power of understanding that we are a co-regulating species. And sometimes simply trying to regulate our nervous system enough isn't enough because we need others to regulate our nervous system. I'm going to say that again. As a species, we need others to regulate our nervous system. And so all of the internal self-regulation tools are amazing, but the power of coming together and doing the self-regulation tools is where others help us to map and lower our system. And that's kind of the key piece of why it's so powerful. And I think it was Suzanne, sorry if I'm misquoting who said it last time, but something about, oh no, I can't remember, but the power of where two or more are combined, in one, and a cord of three is not easily broken. And no matter in which testaments we read, in which religions, there is something connected to understanding the power of co-regulating, that together there is that great energy and that great movement in co-regulating. So understanding the fact that, yes, we can have all the regulation tools. I could teach you so many amazing tools, but sometimes understanding that the trauma in our world is so much for our brain that it is powerful and necessary to co-regulate often. And I don't mean often like every few days. I mean several times a day with other people who can help you regulate your nervous system. And the more that you are around others who are in high stress, the more you're aware that you are biologically wired to begin to respond in a stress response, your sympathetic nervous system. It's part of trying to protect us, but we've become such a chronic stress, toxic stress world that we are constantly, for lack of a better term, vomiting our stress on each other. So we're all walking around kind of covered in each other's stress vomit. So I leave you with that beautiful metaphor that perhaps we should co-regulate a little more healthily for our own nervous systems. But so what I'd love to do is talk a bit about how when we're in a permacrisis, which is what we're feeling now. So it's this extended period of instability and insecurity. So high levels of terror, high levels of aggression, stress, trauma. It seems to be one catastrophic event after the other. Our brains are trying to process all of the information, but yet there's no time to process the information. We are being inundated, sometimes minute by minute, from crisis to crisis. And it's worn down our brain's resilience and mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Because as we'll talk about in just a minute, those aren't separated. So oftentimes we like to talk about there's an emotional brain, or, there's a rational brain, or all of our feelings and emotions, but those are not separate. So the brain interprets its world through its senses, its affect, its emotion. Some cultures have emotion, others don't. And they're actually a little closer to what we know about the brain. They don't separate emotion from thinking, neither does the brain. And they don't separate experiences from emotion, and neither does the brain. The brain interprets all of it and tries to make sense of the story. and it tells us a story that we then believe is reality. So being aware, that being curious, of always questioning yourself, is this just a story I've told myself, has great power. Because then we don't get stuck in boxes that we put ourselves in where we can't take perspective of others. We can't error check or reality test, right? So that's what I mean by always asking ourselves, is this just a story? Because it is, right? So that's the error checking. That's the reality testing. Could there be a different truth for somebody else? Yes. And is that okay too? Yes. Because that makes us an adaptive species who can then learn and become more intelligent together, right? And I'm not saying that there's not right and wrong and all of these things. I'm saying by being an adaptive learner, we can easily get ourselves out of othering, and we can begin to say, even though maybe I don't understand their point of view, if I can understand how maybe I would feel that way as a human, now you begin the unlock of co-regulation. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, that's that unlock for you. Okay. But I think one of the things I'd love to do too is that talk about, we find ourselves when we are constantly inundated with this permacrisis, crisis after crisis after crisis. It's drop after drop after drop. And we find ourselves feeling hopelessness. We find ourselves feeling guilt or even shame, right? Which are experiences of feeling like maybe I shouldn't come together and be happy. Maybe I don't have the right when the rest of the world is suffering to find gratitude or to find, hope or peace or happiness, right? So we begin to grapple with what it means to be human, and this frustration and anger that how could a God I believe in or a force other than my own do something so, allow something so awful to happen. And we begin this feelings of injustice and indignation, and then how do we deal with it? And I know yesterday, I'm going to keep talking to Suzanne because we just had such a great conversation yesterday planning for today, but we talked a bit and we settled on what we thought was really lovely, which was something that kept surfacing, which is space. That when our brains and our bodies and our world is so inundated that we can't even find the time to feel or think, that we need to find the space, right? Because we're not operating in any sort of higher levels of intelligence processing. We're really just sort of putting out fires, or we're numbing and we're avoiding, right? So you start to see those behaviors as well, that we all handle trauma in very different ways based on how we learned to handle it when we were younger, right? So we often hear fight, flight, freeze, but there's actually 6 different. There's fawn and there's flop and there's faint. There are so many ways that our body responds to being overactivated, to where it needs to shut down its nervous system because it needs to kind of hold on to its resources. And I'm going to talk about why that's so important. But I think one of the big key pieces was some space. So how do we focus on creating the space so we can calm the noise, right? Because we're inundated with so much data, bombarded from around us in the outside world. How do we peel away the layers? How do we find the prerequisite, which is allowing our brains to do its number one job? I'm going to talk about that. But our brain's job is to listen and regulate its own internal systems. So when we talk about if we want to change the world, we have to start with the fact that we're not even listening to our own internal systems anymore. So we're going to talk about my 2 favorite topics today, and then I'm going to stop talking and see if people have questions. But first is co-regulation. So how do we actually, as a species, co-regulate our own brain and body systems? Sorry. And then how do we use that, the power, of co-regulation to co-create? Because I think often we assume co-regulation is also co-creation, and it's not. So co-regulation is regulating our nervous systems and regulating our neural systems. But when that's a prerequisite, and once we can co-regulate, then we can begin to release things like oxytocin and serotonin, which are neurotransmitters, neurochemicals that make you feel that someone else is trustworthy. And until that happens, you will never be able to take perspective of someone else or to have empathy. So I know we like to talk about feelings and emotions, but in the brain, they're really just chemicals and electrical pulses. And if we understand that what's happening to us and in our world, we don't have the toolbox we need. You know, we need a toolbox, a big toolbox that we can dip into with physiological, psychological tools for really helping to improve our own affect, our own mental health, and how do we begin to co-regulate our nervous and neural systems. And then when we put these things together, then we have a toolkit. And then it's okay to allow ourselves to feel the full range of rage and guilt and frustration and exhaustion and all the things we need to feel. But then we have a toolkit to co-regulate and process them in very healthy ways and to exist in an optimistic, as much as possible, peaceful state, because we're with people who are helping us to regulate those deeper, intense emotions and feelings. And our desire to engage we call it a generative drive, but if you think of the word to generate, to create, our desire as a species to create and to innovate and to problem solve and to build and contribute and to our world in a meaningful way, we're hardwired to want to do that. But in order for our brains to actually engage those processing capabilities, perspective taking, creating, future visioning, we actually have to begin with what the brain and body is currently experiencing, because your brain has two main jobs. So I talked about a bunch of neuromyths in the last session, so please go back and listen if you didn't get to see those. But your brain has two jobs, and I really want to focus on this today because these are big unlocks, is that your first brain's priority is maintaining allostasis. We also call it a body budget. Okay. Some of you are like, yes, we know this term. We teach this term. You're probably more of an expert than half of us in the room. And the second is your brain's job is to predict. It's technically a guessing machine. So its first job is to maintain. So it's a myth. It's a myth that your brain is for rationality or to think or to perceive the world or for you to see or hear or feel, because that's actually not how the brain works. Your brain's main function and priority is to regulate your body so that it can move around the world efficiently and you can survive with your other species. The core task of your brain is a fun word, allostasis, but your brain is regulating your body's internal systems always. And it's always trying to predict and anticipate what your body needs internally to prepare it, to address it before it comes. And Suzanne's actually going to lead us in a practice at the end of the session, and it's called interoception. But let me just do a quick check. How many of you are familiar with the word interoception? You're so quiet.
Well, I think here, was there anyone? No one.
Okay. Oh, Suzanne's
Well,
going to have so much fun teaching us about this.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the group there was no hands raised. So
Maybe
no
we
one.
don't know the word. Maybe if you
But I
explain,
mean
we
the
know.
word. So
The word.
Yeah,
word we
I'm
don't
gonna
know.
I'm going to get there, Suzanne. I know, but I like the big science words. No, I'm kidding. How many of you think that we have like 5 senses? So sight, touch, sound, smell, hand raised. How many of you think you have 5 senses? Anybody? How many think you have 6?
Okay.
7?
2 here. 3 or more. Okay,
7?
so
8?
7. Some people are saying a lot. Infinite. Someone is saying infinite.
She's just going all the way.
What's your name? What's your name? Dinas is saying that according to ancient Egyptian knowledge, there's 360.
we don't, she might be correct. So we are always finding new ones. And so for now, we think 8 or 9 that we can actually map, but we are so aware that the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. Especially in Western medicine, we are quite aware that we are just now being able to prove with all the imaging and technology, things that if we look in ancient Chinese wisdom from thousands of years ago, they've mapped the vagus nerve perfectly, right? So to understand that there's such amazing lost knowledge and wisdom, that the more we joke, but the more we know we don't know, which is great fun because the more we're learning. But what I'd like to talk about too is that of the 8 or 9 that we're aware of, one of them is called interoception. So you have the outward senses, right? So we talk about sight, touch, taste, smell, those. So they're kind of your outward data for your very trapped, limited box of a brain. And the others are also inward data. And we do actually know that we cellularly interpret through our world as well, right? But so interoception is the understanding that your body is in your brain's perception of your body state. Okay, so let's try a test. We're going to do it right now. Okay, so I want you to kind of sit in kind of a comfortable position and close your eyes and put your hands kind of relaxed beside your body. And I want you to try to feel your heart beating. And I mean, really feel it, not hear the pulse in your ears. That's your blood flow. Feel your heart beating in your chest. Can you now, without moving your hands, can you take your own pulse? Can you feel the movement and the rhythm? This is called interoception. You have a sense, your brain's perception of your body states. So you have receptors on all of your organs that are constantly transmitting sensory data to your brain, just like touch, smell, sight. And interoception, your brain's awareness of its own internal state, has enormous consequences for your well-being. So we've been able to prove that our sensitivity, so being able to do what I just asked you to do, actually take your own pulse without taking your own pulse, right? But actually being able to feel it, be so aware of the sensation that your brain and body are communicating, determine our capacity to regulate our emotions or our affect, our mood, which is always there, whether our emotions are up and down. It determines our susceptibility to mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. So although we're talking about co-regulating, we actually can't talk about it without understanding interoception, which is your brain's representation of the sensations it's getting from inside its own body. So allostasis is the brain's #1 job. It needs to maintain a body budget, a metabolic energy of every single thing your brain and body need to stay alive. And the sensation of allostasis is called interoception. So when Suzanne takes us, and I don't want to take through her session, but when she takes us through what it means to create space, what it means to just tap into your own sensation of the internal states of your body, that is directly connected to mental and emotional health. That's directly connected to physical health, because the more disconnected we are from ourselves, the more disconnected we are from others, the more disconnected we are from our world, right? And so understanding that there's great power in tapping into our interoception is an important sense that our body's #1 job is listening to its own body, our brain's #1 job, excuse me. So how do people around you change your body budget and rewire your brain? So I think that's probably like the biggest question I got after our last session, which is, what does co-regulation really mean? So how is it that I'm next to someone and within about 10 or 15 minutes, our breathing starts to synchronize, our heartbeats regulate. We actually will start mirroring each other's movements. If I put my hand on my face, kind of half of everybody will do too. So we start to begin to mirror each other. If you've ever lived together with other women, you know that your cycles start to correspond together. So it's just a small understanding of how intricately connected we are, because our brain changes its own wiring after new experiences. So I know last time I said something and everybody said, what? But I said, you can't change anyone else's thinking. You can't. And to be super honest, you actually can't change your own, not in the way that we try to. Our brains learn little by little every day. Every experience, your brain is constantly tuning or pruning as you interact with others and your world. Some brains are more attentive to the people around them. Some of us are much more sensitive to our world. You know, and oftentimes we have very insulting words for people being sensitive or snowflake or fragile or all of these things, but that's actually how we're supposed to be. We're designed to be hypersensitive to our world and each other. We function better as a species if we function the way we're designed, versus making it be something that we don't talk about or we don't discuss, or it's a sickness or an illness, versus understanding we've become disconnected from what we're supposed to be doing to heal ourselves and others, right? And then when we do that, understanding that ultimately your family, friends, neighbors, even strangers are contributing to your brain's structure and function every single day. To keep your brain humming along, to keep us continually balancing that budget, changes in one person's body will prompt changes in another person's body. Even if you're not romantically involved, just friends, even strangers meeting for the first time. So if you're a stranger and you get with someone you trust, and within about 10, 15 minutes, you can develop we kind of trust each other human connection. Even your gaze, what you look at, will synchronize. You'll begin to look at certain similar things together. Have you noticed yourself doing that? When you're talking to somebody, if they look somewhere else, you can't help yourself. You sort of kind of look too. It's part of our way of regulating each other's attention and nervous system. It doesn't matter if it's a peaceful conversation or a heated argument, the co-regulation happens. Groups like this, yoga classes, singing choir together, all of these things, as long as we establish trust. So I want to talk about that because that's a prerequisite. Trust, then co-regulation as a species happened. Okay. So it's really important that we understand that our brains are always in a dance. Okay. If someone smiles at you, I would love for you to try not smiling back. It's really hard, actually. It's a fun experiment if you go around smiling at everybody and see how many people can't smile back at you. We mirror each other as a species, and it's that fast. You didn't even know this person, and you just smiled, right? But you're smiling because we mirror as a species. It's that easy that we can co-regulate peace and we can regulate calm if we can understand how fast we are regulating each other's nervous systems. We're actually going around bumping into each other, hoping somebody else kind of regulates for us. You know, I like this metaphor. It's not really how it works, but the metaphor, if you remember chemistry and physics class, and you remember how certain atoms, in order to be stable, so it had to like give away electrons or receive electrons. Do you remember this? And when it gives away an electron or it receives an electron, it forms a bond. Well, as human beings, we are a bit similar. You are always making deposits or withdrawals in each other's body budgets. We are continuously giving and taking from other people's body budgets. How many times have you been in a room with someone? Someone asked about how do we correspond with our families who trigger us? Yes, we will talk about that. So yes, how many times have you left a conversation and you feel like you just need to sleep for like 12 hours because that person took so much energy from your metabolic budget. They were so exhausting to your very limited brain and body resources, right? And then you meet other people and immediately you're like, woo, you fill my cup up, right? So that understanding of how we co-regulate is really important, because if we know that one person's always leading and one is following and we're sharing, not real electrons, but you are sharing energy, that what is really important is that when we don't like each other or we don't trust each other, we're actually sort of stepping on each other's toes. We're interfering and misreading social cues, and we cause stress to our nervous system, which causes stress to everyone else's nervous system that we're around. I think one of my most favorite quotes, and I'm going to stop and let people ask some questions, but one of my most favorite quotes was Dr. Feldman Barrett, and she said once, the best thing for the human nervous system or the human body budget is another human being. And the worst thing for a human body budget is also another human being. And it's because if we understand that we are so biologically wired to immediately co-regulate, you don't think about it. You don't even know it's happening oftentimes because we're separated from our interoception, that we are immediately triggered into that. And I think right before I open the floor for questions, I do want to talk about why the body budget is so important, right? So in the last session, you heard me say you'll probably only retain about 50% of what I'm saying. Thank goodness for technology, because you can go back and listen to it. But sometimes it's even lower. Sometimes it's as low as 25%. Have you ever been reading a sentence and you had to read it 4 or 5 times, and then you realize you still haven't actually processed what you read? Has that ever happened to you? What is happening? Yes. Well, what's happening is it's even happening to you right now. So most of you are trying to listen to me, and I'm trying to be animated, so I'm a little more exciting for you. And you're processing my words, but at the same time, your brain is performing a complex series of calculations and predictions, because its number one job is to budget for your metabolic energy. It is constantly performing intricate calculations and predictions for its resources: glucose, water, oxygen, salt, blood, hormones, amino acids, cortisol, neurotransmitters, dozens, hundreds more. In this very second, your brain is also interpreting waves of light, chemicals in the air, the vibrations of my voice. You then process them and turn them into sights and smells and words. And then your brain works even harder and it makes meaning of the sounds and words coming out of my mouth. All of this is happening at the same time. So to say that you can retain 50% of what I say is fascinating and amazing because your brain is running such an intense body budget. And with every stress and with everything in our world, it takes a withdrawal. So it's taking out. So every trauma takes a withdrawal. It's exhausting to our brain and body. It's expending valuable resources of glucose. And our brain runs purely on glucose. I don't know if people know that. So when you're feeling very exhausted and you're fatigued, we didn't even talk about the complex system. So in addition to all of that, your brain is managing your cardiovascular system so that the heart is pumping blood, your respiratory system so that you're naturally autonomically taking in oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. Your immune system is working hard to make sure you're fighting infection right now. So your body budget is so complex. Its number one job is that. It's the chief financial officer of a global corporation. It's the chief strategy officer. It's the chief sustainability officer. It's the chief human resources officer and the CEO all simultaneously. So I want to take a minute and do what we talk about, which is find the pause. We call it the power of the pause, which is that space. because I want you to remember this one thing, which is that your brain is not for thinking. Your brain is always doing two main things. It's lovingly trying to balance a very desperately withdrawn body budget for most of us, and it's predicting for the future, always trying to keep you alive. So allostasis, this fun word, is your body budget. It's the energy, the metabolic energy that your brain is trying to allocate very stretched out to each of your body functions to keep you alive. And when we deplete those resources, lack of sleep, chronic stress, poor diet, surrounding ourselves with people who are constantly making withdrawals instead of putting in deposits, we become very vulnerable because our brain has to work to decide what gets resources and what doesn't, right? So when we think about a bank account that has a negative balance, if you have a negative balance, what do you stop doing? Well, hopefully, what do you stop doing?
Put more money in. Save it.
Well, let's hope. Spending. Well, if you don't stop spending, the bank will tell you you have no money to spend. Yes. Because you've run a deficit, right? Or if we think of our physical home, just like our bodily home, when we're trying to save energy has become very expensive. What do?
We turn off some functions.
We turn off functions. We turn off the lights. We unplug really key appliances. Like, can I live without the coffee pot, right? So we turn off heating and cooling, if that's an option. We begin to really stretch out the resources and shut down functions. And your brain does the same. And if we can understand that our brain is, wow, running an intense global corporation right now, and we just constantly keep making withdrawals, and we are inundated in a world that is making withdrawals. And then we feel things like guilt and shame, and we don't want to come together and co-regulate and build each other up. But we need to understand that we're operating on such a low body budget that the brain doesn't have any option but to cut resources. You will see spiritual illness, physical illness, emotional illness, and mental illness. Now, I'm not trying to simplify what's the crisis of the world, but if you understand that almost everyone in the world is running on a really low operating budget, we can start to have compassion for how people cannot access empathy. You can't access perspective taking, right? So we're asking people to do things that because of the allostasis and the body budget, they're not able to do. And the reason is because to take someone else's perspective requires a lot of metabolic energy because our brain's always predicting. And if we're trying to predict and understand a perspective we don't have a past mental model for, that's expensive. Okay, that's hard to be around people who require a lot of predictive and emotional regulation. Your brain is struggling to interpret this person, to make understandings of this person. It requires a lot from the budget. And the brain is not going to sacrifice a major organ for that person. And so what it does is it limits your abilities in real key neurological functions. Because it's like, no, I don't need to take that person's perspective. I have to keep my heart alive. Priorities, right? And so what happens is it's super comfortable for us to be around people who don't require energy. We get around people who think like us. We get around people who don't require us to stretch neurologically, don't require us to learn different things because we are so depleted on our body budget that what feels safe is to get in silos and echo chambers, to get in places where we don't learn about new cultures and we don't try to take someone else's perspective because we haven't filled up our own body budget. And oftentimes, you know, and I think, Suzanne, we were talking about this yesterday, that adage that, you know, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Or I when you're on an airplane and they tell you that the oxygen mask is going to drop and that you have to put yours on first before you help your children or your partner, whoever's screaming next to you. And the reason is because you're no good to anyone if you're dead. But we go around every day not doing that. And in fact, we feel like that makes us a better person because we're sacrificing ourselves for others. But what we're doing is we're actually limiting our ability to be a higher functioning species. We are completely limiting our ability to have empathy. You cannot take empathy when your body budget is in a deficit. You can't take perspective. You can't even be innovative and creative and problem solve. When our body budgets are in a deficit, we don't have access to expensive metabolic functions. Coming together in communities like this, coming together, singing, hugging, happiness, prayer, joy. Yes, you will struggle with feeling guilt and shame, but you have to understand that if we are not doing our number one priority, which is filling up our cup, and in the world we live in, it's like set a timer every 15 minutes. You better go hug somebody because our body is completely being withdrawal. At this point, I just feel like I need to walk around hugging somebody. And the power of understanding that when you can co-regulate to keep each other in high levels of that body budget bank account, then you become superhuman. You become so in tune with your ability to have empathy and innovate, create the future. Your brain cannot predict the future when it's in crisis. So the ability to come together in a community like this, I can't explain. I know it may sound fluffy and fuzzy, but from a neuroscience and neurobiology perspective, this is powerful. This is what we need to do as human beings. Instead of isolating ourselves from each other, instead of getting into echo chambers and chat rooms where everybody agrees with us, we actually need to co-regulate with people who fill our cup, but then challenge each other to push our boundaries. So we get together in love and we push our boundaries. We learn how to talk to people who we wouldn't talk to before. We explore other cultures. We learn languages we wouldn't. We try to purposefully take perspective of someone that we cannot agree with. But you can't train your brain to develop a big toolbox if you don't fill up its body budget first. So now I have thrown so much information at you. I'm going to stop because I feel like I put you in stress talking about your body budget. So I want to actually give you a super fast tool to get you out of it. And then we'll have some questions. Is that okay? And then I'm going to give us a second tool too, because I know you're here for tools. So the first one is called the physiological side. And there's so much research now out of Stanford that this is the one tool that is about 98% effective every time. And it's so easy and amazing to do because you do it naturally. So very quickly, I know I'm probably telling you all in this room, you guys know all of these things I'm saying, but the in-breath is your sympathetic, your stress response system, your alert system is your in-breath. So I want you to do that, like really fill up, go. And then what do you feel? You should feel a little tingly even, like oxygen's flowing, heart's pumping faster, all cells are like, woo, something's about to happen, right? So everything got very excited in your body. That is an alert response. Your out breath, do it. That's your parasympathetic. That is your rest response. Your vagus nerve is your light switch. And with every breath, so the saying that breath is life is true. Your act of breathing is regulating your entire nervous system. Every organ, every cell in your body is regulated by the act of breathing. When you breathe in, it's a stress response. When you breathe out, it's a relaxation response. That quickly, you can flip your switch. But if you don't have that interoceptive capability, that Suzanne's really going to talk us through in a little while. But if you're so aware that all of a sudden you've been sort of co-regulating with somebody in stress, right? Or even you're just the one in stress. Your body budget is done. You didn't sleep. You don't eat well. You're vomiting on everybody else, right? So if you can feel that in yourself and have tools to self-regulate and be aware that you need to go co-regulate with somebody who can help you get to that state of filling your body budget back up, right? But the quickest one is called the physiological sigh, because physiologically, you do this naturally. Your body knows how to heal itself. It's brilliant, right? So what it is it's a yawn, sort of. So if you're going to yawn, you do this big like, and you really fill up. But then you'll notice you actually kind of go one more deep. You're like, after that. Or when a baby's crying and they've been sobbing, it's like that, like that. So your body's physiological sigh. And what happens is it helps the little airway sacs in your lungs expand to where they get that complete oxygen push, right? It's the breath of life, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to take a deep inhale and you're going to really fill up, and then you're going to take one more little push. So you're going to go like a yawn. And then you're going to do a really long exhale. And if you do it, sometimes it only takes once. You do it 2 or 3 times, you should feel your entire nervous system regulate. You'll get a little tingly and you'll feel very calm. I've had people like fall asleep on me, so that's okay. They needed to sleep. Okay. So what I want us to do is to do a physiological sigh. So what you're going to do, and you can get as comfortable as you want, but it's good not to pinch on the vagus nerve, right? So your mom was right. Hold your posture up. But what I want you to do is to really fill up. And then right when you're filling up, you do one more like, and then you just do a very long exhale. See if you can do like 8, 9, 10 counts of an exhale. Okay. So let's try it and kind of see what your body feels like afterwards. Okay. I'm going to let you do it on your own, but everybody, let's do a physiological sigh. Oh, that's good. We'll do another one. Do you feel a little tingly? So the more we do this and we can activate and understand that we're regulating our nervous system, so we can regulate our neural system, because our CEO is on a withdrawal system for its big factory. And if we can regulate it, then we can access really amazing capabilities as a human being. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking and open the floor for the questions, the arguments, the disagreements, something.
Everyone is like,
yes, but now you'll know. People will start to know that you don't like them if you start sighing around them all the time, like you're yawning.
Well, I think what we can do, maybe we can unmute there, and you know, if people have questions, and maybe also actually not a good idea. Okay, so maybe we just type the questions, and
yeah.
Or when they turn it on, we can turn on.
Yeah, exactly. So or actually here people can just come here forward. So if you have questions, so maybe you can start with the questions that are being asked online, and then after that, we'll do the questions from here, this group.
Yeah, perfect. So Jeff says, can I talk about the influence of the institution, whether it's religious, cultural, government, right? Let's talk about that one. In regards to this. So there are known tools to deconstruct institutional influence. Are there known tools, excuse me? And he says it's beautiful to co-regulate and encourage tools and techniques for us to undertake. But what or when of the institution has replaced, intra or introspection with immovable laws? It's a very loaded question, but I'll take a stab at it. So what I would say is we do see that a lot, especially in post-war countries. So oftentimes human beings respond to pushing against laws that they feel are violating their rights or a group of people. And so wars will start. And then afterwards, often the other group responds with the exact same response with a large set of laws and restrictions. And it's out of fear, right? Of control as human beings, to control the others. And what I can say, Jeff, is what's worked. And so I can't speak to all cultures because there's absolutely no way the brain is a fingerprint. So everybody, and we'll talk about this, how all of your past experiences make you decide what to think about the current situation. So everyone is different. But what I have noticed is the unlock, and I can tell you that. So how do you get people? And I'm talking in the Balkans, so we're dealing with, you know, a Turkish population, Muslim population. You're dealing with the Albanians, and you're dealing with Macedonians. You're dealing with the Orthodox Christians, and also some Jews. So it's a fun melting pot of really everyone's different values and belief systems. And I will say the one thing that you can get people to agree on is that if you can get them to sit at the table and to say, we can sit across from each other no matter what has happened. And they don't have to sit at a real table. You can do virtual, that's okay. But we want for our children to not be in this situation. So I have found that the one thing that can break through and make other people see each other as humans is to know that they don't want their children and their next generations to live the violence or to live the oppression that they have. And oftentimes you're not going to get government leaders to do this. You're not going to get religious leaders to do this because they have the power. And so what you're asking them to do is relinquish power over other populations, and that's not going to happen. But what you can do is you can target the populations who actually have the most power anyway. We call them a shadow system within an organization, but they are typically the mothers, the grandmothers, the elders, the teachers, and those are the ones you want anyway, because those are the ones who the children are co-regulating with. So you really are wasting your time on government leaders. I mean, sorry, this is being recorded and live broadcast, but whoops, but they don't have the initiative or desire. You're asking them to take on an ethical responsibility to maybe care for future generations over their own belief system that their highest order of care is to repress another population, right? So I don't know if I'm explaining that very clearly, but you're not going to convince them to think differently. But they will allow you to care for the next generation. And so if you can get in and you start to begin to teach these tools. So I have taught this. I have taught all the breathing. We vibrate our vagus nerve. So, you know, when you talk about doing an Om chant, you're vibrating the vagus nerve. You're vibrating in reverse. So you vibrate your entire nervous system from bottom up to the brain. And you can vibrate it to where you actually like faint. And so I've not had a problem actually teaching regulation tools as long as they understand it's not tied to a religion. It's very much based in how do we regulate our own systems as human beings? How do we relate to each other? And I have yet to find anybody who says, no, I don't want our next generation to be like super intelligent and we don't want them to be calm and peaceful and regulated. So I don't know if I'm answering your question fully, but I think to understand that you're not going to change a system with those who are, their main responsibility is to keep that system in place. What you can do is you can create such a massive ripple effect that you make their system inconsequential anyway, because you've transformed whole communities and mindsets, and they begin to co-regulate in ways that you can't even begin to imagine how they co-regulate for peace and happiness and joy. And they come together in a new tribe of humanity very quickly. So I don't know if I answered that for you, Jeff. Okay.
So, Rebecca, for example, I mean, if we take the news that is everywhere today with the conflict in Palestine and Israel, so given the knowledge and the tools that you've been sharing, so if you were given a magic wand and you could do an intervention, what would that look like?
It's a great question. I would say I would go with what I know has worked, because that's the one thing that we do know about human beings is what I just said. We human beings are a remarkable fingerprint. So let me back up and explain why what I'm about to say is going to make sense. So just follow with me for just a second. So our brain is always predicting. It actually doesn't know the present. I know that sounds strange, but let me explain. Your brain is always getting sensory data, but it kind of doesn't know what's causing the data. It's just guessing. Like, so here's a sound, a bang. Is it a car backfired? Was it a gunshot? Was it the door? It needs to figure out and make a good guess. And it goes into its brain and it goes, when have I ever heard, felt, sound, smelled, something like that? And then it predicts based on past experiences what the present, well, what the future should be. So it's always making an action plan. So your brain is balancing its body budget and then predicting and making an action plan. It does this like this, right? So that's what we know we have constant as human beings. We know that brains function that way. Phew, we found one thing in common, right? We know brains function that way, and we know we co-regulate as a species, and we co-regulate really well if you do it well, okay? So if you understand that those don't have to be toxic things, right? That those can actually be powerful gift things, then what you can do is you can go in and say to both of those, and this is what I will tell you I noticed. Both sides, the Palestinian and the Israelis, and it's not just them, it's all over the world, but they are both very upset about the loss of children, right? And even women, not such a touchy subject anymore, but children is still kind of a no-go for humanity, right? Because as a species, we are wired to want to make sure our generations and our generations live on. And so although they may not know exactly why it bothers them, we're wired to actually ensure that our children and our children's children survive. So if we understand what's the magic wand is to go in and say, you can continue with violence, you can continue destroying one another, but eventually it's going to be enough. And then what do? Where do you pick up the pieces? How do you make sure that enough is enough? When do you decide that the generational wars do not continue to repeat? And it's going to take someone, whether it's a grandmother or it's a teacher or it's a small movement of teens, right? So we saw the same thing happen with climate change, right? Sometimes it's the most unexpected people who rise up and say, enough is enough, and we want to learn a different way. So typically what happens is you have to work within the system to know who has the shadow power within the system. So don't have a magic wand to know who has the shadow power in both of those systems, but oftentimes there are people who are in care of children. So sometimes it's the Minister of Labor and Social Policy or the Minister of Education or Health, who you will get to still feel a great burden of care for their people. And when you can get people who feel a burden of care to agree to begin caring, they don't have to care together. They just have to care in parallel. I'm going to say that again. So you don't actually have to get them together and do anything with the children, do anything together. You don't have to. That has worked, and it will later on, but you can actually just get them to both begin as adults learning this and co-regulating and taking on a responsibility to not pass on that stress and trauma to children. And then once they can get out of a body budget imbalance, I know it sounds super trivial, but it works. If we can get out of a body budget balance, then you can actually begin to get them together in a completely different area and frame of mind, right? But as long as both are still in a state of high intense stress, You're not going to get people to take perspective. It's not possible for the brain. It's too much of a body budget load and too much of a trauma trigger. So it's a very long story. If I had a magic wand to understand what's the shadow system, to understand who in that system is feeling the burden of great care for the lives of the next generation. And when you can get those people to begin regulating and caring for self and others, then they can begin to work together. Then they can begin to agree on the one thing, which is we don't want our children and our children's children to continue on killing each other, to continue on hurting each other. They won't agree on anything else a lot of times, but that's a start. Because if you can do that, then you can break the cycle. And over time, they don't have to agree on anything else, but they can begin to co-regulate. And I had a friend and she had this really amazing idea, but she was saying, what if we did an app like Tinder? It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. But if we matched people up based on the human things they had in common, like I'm a mother with 3 children, you're a mother with 3 children, and you begin to have the conversations. If we see each other as human beings and we can co-regulate a trust in something we have in common, we can begin to then co-regulate. Whether they want to or not, you can begin to co-regulate them. Okay. And so that's the approach we've taken, which is find the teachers, find the mothers, find, the people who care, the elders in the community who want their children to grow up differently. And then there's the burden of care. And when there's a burden of care, they can go regulate, and then they will stand up for making sure that it stops the cycle and they can begin to co-regulate. When that happens and we trust each other, then we can begin building that adaptive intelligence. And it's a much longer conversation about how do you actually get people to start taking perspective of each other. I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that was perfect. Any questions here? Anyone has questions? Yeah.
More than a question,
Wait. Sorry. Can we?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Hold on, and then I'll just come to you.
Okay.
So I hear you on finding. I hear you on like finding. That sounds like a long-term solution, right? In terms of building a future where people aren't living in constant war. But for a thing like Palestine right now, what would be an immediate solution? Because I'm thinking too of you saying when a brain is like when we have a deficit and you're overwhelmed, you can't access creativity or empathy. So what does one do to like if you the powers, like the people holding power that are like dropping bombs, if they can't access empathy, how do you like make them stop dropping?
I wish we could. I can say that in the same way that you can't change anyone's thinking, you're not going to make anyone change what they do. But what we have seen, if you look at very powerful peace movements in the past, that a human response to someone else's inhuman behavior can create that. So last time I talked about it, our brain changes with a spotlight of attention. Okay. So if people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and others, if a response to someone else's violence is not equal violence, but a human act of forgiveness, of empathy, then what you can do is you can shine a light on someone else's mindset for them. What you can do is do things that create experiences that cause cognitive disequilibrium. I know that sounds very lengthy. So basically what happens is if you can create an experience to where that person now can't put you in the very tiny story box they had you in, that of the othering, right? They can't put you in the enemy. You do something that is kind and empathetic and forgiving to them. then what you do is you cause just a little bit of cognitive disequilibrium. You cause the brain to go, wait a minute, I didn't predict that. Wait a minute, that doesn't match with what I told myself about this person, right? Because the brain is always predicting. And that's the hard part. So if when we're attacked, we can respond in a way that causes cognitive disequilibrium. And I know I may be pushing back on people who say, peaceful resistance, all of these things. I'm telling you from a neurological perspective that what happens is if you can cause someone else's brain to go, wait, I didn't predict that. That goes against everything I thought was going to happen. You cause their brain cognitive disequilibrium. And when that happens, they have to reassess the situation and all of their data. That's how we learn as human beings. And to be better at it ourselves, that's why I said it's a longer story. The more we do that for ourselves, the better we actually get at practicing empathy. It's cultural peace and peace. It's a practice. It's pushing ourselves into cognitive disequilibrium each time, forcing ourselves to take someone else's perspective, to be on the other side of someone who has, and it could be an abuser, right? So to be the victim of sexual abuse, so it doesn't have to be war, right? And to say, you know what, I choose to take my power back. I choose to forgive. I choose to love. I choose to see this now as a gift. I see this now as a purpose for me to help change the world. Somehow in that way, what you do is you're creating a cognitive disequilibrium. Okay. And so little things like this, we actually see do massive transformation. So I'll give you a quick example, and it's not about war. I could give you some more examples, but I can give you a war example after this, but there was a story in the newspaper about 2 years ago, I think. And there was an elderly man, and he was a war veteran, of course, had survived his own traumas, right? And he read on Twitter a comedian who said something about his political candidate, okay? He took it remarkably personable. Well, that's what we do. We interpret personal attacks that really often aren't personal, right? And tweeted some really vitriolic things, wishing this person dead, people, all of this really, really horrible vitriolic things. And the person responded, the comedian responded, which is what my second point was, which is the way you flip it, brilliantly. The comedian scrolled through the person's feed and responded on Twitter, hey, everybody, this person just, attacked me. But if you look through all of his feed, he's really going through some real health issues, and he's having a real hard time about it. And he's in a really shitty spot right now. And if I were in his place, I would feel the same way. That human unlock of, if I were in your shoes, I could understand how you would feel that way. That doesn't mean I think what you do is right. What you're saying is, I'm breaking through that I'm not a human. I can say, I understand how you feel what you feel. That's it. I can understand that you feel what you feel. And it must be pretty rough for you. And so he donated to his GoFundMe page and asked all of his followers, millions of followers, to donate as well. And the article was actually an interview with the old man. And what he was saying was, I realized how knee-jerk my response was. I need to go back and find the article, but what he was saying was cognitive disequilibrium. He was saying that act of empathy made me realize how horrible I had been acting, and I was embarrassed and ashamed, right? And so the understanding of what he did, and it's a small scale, is cognitive disequilibrium. It's a flip, right? It's a flip. And even in post-war countries, recent post-war, so I've had prime ministers decide to make the opposition party the majority in their cabinet. And that is risky, right? But decided to do the opposite of what people assumed they would do, right? And not only do that, but then to take press conferences joint, decide to say, even though, we are recent recovering war and these people did horrible atrocities, we're going to sit at the table together, and I'm not going to pass a bill unless we sign it together. Really kind of shocking, flip it on its face sort of behavior But what it does is it takes away the power from the stories we tell about each other. It makes us human. And when we can create just that little crack in the brain, we can create that crack that, wait, they're not the enemy, they're not the bad guy. Maybe I need a new story. Then you can come in and begin to help tell a new story. Now, does it always work? No, it isn't. There is no magic wand. But if we understand how we can create cracks in cognitive disequilibrium, and if you can create a big enough movement of people who will eventually say, that isn't who we are anymore, then you can create change. But it actually takes people making that move, which is very hard to do, because instinctively, biologically, we want to respond back with like aggression and like kind. It's very quiet. I hope everybody's okay.
Sorry, we have another question here. Yeah. Actually, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So it's a continuation of the topic. I think like the biggest cognitive dissonance that we're experiencing right now is to believe that the help and the transition is going to come from the outside world or from a savior or like the government, and like it's about time for us to like wake up from the American dream that the government is useful, because like we have seen for hundreds of years that governments around the world have just been abusing people and been systematically oppressing and destroying indigenous people around the world for thousands of years, like a couple thousands of years. And we're waking up to that reality as a species right now. It's like that's what we see in the war in Middle East and in Africa, in Congo, and Ethiopia, and Armenia, like so many countries that are going off right now. And those countries are the places where humanity started. Those are like the ancient lands and sacred lands. I mean, all of the lands are sacred, but those lands were some of the bastions, I don't know if that's a word in English, where humanity started. And it's for us to like just wake up and see those places, and they're like, oh wow, we really need to protect our children, we need to protect our mothers, and we need to protect organic humanity, because those are the people that have been most oppressed and that suffer the violence of war and the violence of human disagreement and anger and generational pain. So we need to wake up to the reality that we can transition that we can heal that ourselves in our own bodies, in our own communities, in our families, in our own societies. And by doing the personal work of healing it inside ourselves, the animosity, the anger, the pain, the internal violence that each one of us has from our own experience with trauma in life, by healing our own personal trauma triggered by the trauma that is happening around the world right now, we're doing our work, we're doing a contribution. So rather than feeling powerless, we should empower ourselves to go deep inside and feel the feelings, feel what we need to change and shift and dismantle in the way that we operate, by repeating trauma or by repeating addiction or by repeating stress or pain in our own lives, and stopping ourselves from repeating that cycle generation from generation. And by healing ourselves, then heal also our family members, heal our communities, heal the generations in the past and the 7 generations forward, to like really pave the way for the future generations to come to a place that is already ready for them. Like that is a place that is healed, that is a place that is safe, that is a place that has clean water, that has a place with resources, with food, like to really envision the most beautiful world that we can in our own bodies and in our own realities, and try to manifest that with our communities. And like, how can we create more love, more kindness, more abundance in our own right now reality, in our own right now present? Because the more that we put our energy outside, the more that we're going to feel that we're not going to be able to attain it, that we're not going to be able to change the world. But if we start changing the world in our own reality here and with the people that are beside us, then we can change the world.
You see, you just need to come be with me. We're going to do this together. That's I think I couldn't have said it better. That exactly what you're embodying is exactly what works. And, you know, oftentimes we blame social media because, yes, we could talk about this, that social media does both good. And so that it's very fast how people co-regulate on social media. We've even done some experiments with it. But social media has linked those without a voice to now feel the collective power of a voice. And that power of co-regulating across space and time has given a generation who needs to stand up for themselves and say, we take our power back. And as a group, we can heal generations. And I love that you said that because there's so much science and research for what you just said. So we talk about generational trauma like it's like an ethereal thing, but it's cellular, right? So if we understand that everything that happens to us changes our DNA throughout our life, our cells are constantly mutating. That's disease, right? And your cells retain memory, retain information. It's not just your eye color that gets passed down. Lots of things get passed down generationally. It's not fluffy to know that you have memories, even though you never experienced them. You can have cellular memories from past generational DNA that has been passed down. Absolutely. And so the power of understanding that you take your power back. You take your power back and you say, I choose to heal. I choose to heal for myself. I choose to heal for my generations. I choose to heal for my future. And when you can get enough to co-regulate, it doesn't take much, then the power of that ripple effect is phenomenal. And great movements have been started with just few people who decided to say, we choose to heal. And we choose to do it as a collective.
We have just 10 more minutes. I don't know if Rebecca, you had a question?
Just a quick question around
Yeah.
actually, because we've spoken a lot about the.
Yeah, you want to come?
Sorry.
No, here, you might. Okay.
Hi, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think you have to come here. Okay.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm Rebecca as well. Thank you for that. That was really, really amazing. I have a trillion questions, but I'm going to distill into one. I mean, we're going there anyway, but we've spoken a lot.
Do you see how we're all co-regulating? She put her hand on her face, and Swati and I did it too. I just noticed, but I love this. This is amazing. But okay, look, everybody, we're all like, okay. I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Your point, amazing. Sorry, I just wanted to notice we had all just done it.
I didn't want to jump ahead, but you've so brilliantly gone through a lot of the what, but I think that's somewhat conceptual until we get into the how. So I'm wondering if we're going to go into tools. That's all. That's it.
Okay.
Were we going there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of them was the breathing.
Breath. Yeah.
So do you mean you wanted we wanted more tools? Maybe you have a couple of more tools.
Yeah, or even an overview because
You can spend 3 weeks with me. We'll get some tools.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken. So I have to say, I mean, we were kind of even having a conversation to think about doing more sessions because I mean, Rebecca. I mean, this is like a tiny bit of what you can learn from her. So we're actually thinking that, you know, in the new year, we haven't spoken about it, but we've definitely something we were kind of exchanging of having more sessions.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So today was really to kind of, I would say, like kick off, you know, kind of re-empowering ourselves and knowing like we actually can make change. And so that was kind of really, I would say, the main idea of today, that even it seems hopeless, but with all this knowledge of, you know, obviously the brain, how it functions, we can start already making some small changes in our lives so we can affect the bigger picture. So maybe what we can do is like maybe one more tool, but before that, you know, I think if anyone has other questions, so we could start with that and then we'll do one more tool.
I had a quick question.
Yes,
Really
yes,
quickly.
of course.
I was just going back to what you were talking about with sensitivity and highly sensitive people. I think there are probably many in the room. Us will be
Yes.
You tend to be.
Yes. Does the brain know when it's experiencing simulated sensitivity? So, for example, I've stopped watching movies for the last 3 years. I don't watch very many. But I did go to the cinema to see Avatar last year, and I could not deal. Like, I just couldn't do it. So, yeah, can the brain trick itself into knowing when something is simulated versus real?
I love this question.
Yeah.
Love it. Because that's one of the tools we use. And that's one of the tools we teach, is that no. So your brain, if the story it's experiencing feels real enough, the brain it's firing over the same neural pathways as if it's really happening. In fact, you don't actually have memories. I'm just really going to throw so many people out of the water here. Okay. So you actually we don't have a file cabinet. You don't store memories. That is not how the brain works. What happens is it stores data of sensations. And when your brain is predicting a future scenario, and when your brain is recalling, when it's remembering, it's not really remembering, but when it's asking, anybody else in this network have heard or felt something similar? Anybody got something? You know, it's kind of like an I have, who has. So whenever it's firing over those neural connections, the same neural networks have electrical activity on an MRI when a person is recalling a memory and predicting a future. Let me say that again. The brain cannot tell the difference between recalling a memory or a future scenario prediction. It uses the exact same neural connections. We think we evolved to store memories as a prediction, right? So it's a way of keeping your body safe. It's number 2 thing. It's always predicting. But what happens is we're always telling ourselves stories. So you can actually flip that. And if you write a story, so we do it a lot with leaders and government and businesses who are trying to get out of a very stuck belief system, is if you can write a future that's so real that the brain thinks it's a memory and it's already happened, it will take the steps to make it a reality. I know this is a very long conversation, but we actually use this as a tool, and you teach people how to do this daily for yourself, that you can actually convince the brain that something is real. So you think about it, pathological liars, schizophrenia. I mean, we know it happens. You can actually use it to help convince your brain to do something different. And the tool I'm about to teach you has that in it. So if you have a few more minutes, this next tool I'm going to give you is a good one.
Right, so one more last door. Anyone has a question here? And anyone from Zoom, actually, yes. Do you have any questions? Emma, I'm calling on the people. Yeah.
Hi, it's
Okay.
Emma. Hi. Not a question, just an acknowledgement and thank you. I'm sorry I joined late, but in the spirit of the kids,
Yes,
there's a baby. And so on and off camera to help take care of baby, but thank you. And the experiences piece is perfect because it's exactly aligned with what I'm looking at doing in 2024 with as many partners here as possible. The best experiences, all political here in the US. So more to come on that. Just thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you. Thank you, Swati.
I'm very honored. Thank you. I'm thankful to Swati, who includes me on all of her amazing missions to change the world. So she's my soul sister over there.
Yes, definitely. Marjan, I see that is it Marianne? Marianne, sorry. Sorry. I see that you're unmuted, so I don't know if you have question. Okay. So
Hi.
Hi.
Sophie, go ahead.
Hiya. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, obviously at the moment with things, the tensions and like the feeling of a lot of people at the moment, it's very urgent, and we need to do this, we need to share this, like we need to show the world what's happening. And I was just wondering how like is the best way to put this message across, because like in circles like this, it's quite common that we feel this way, but it's this idea is quite alien to a lot of the people around me. And I've heard the term like spiritual bypassing. So yeah, I just wondered how best to address that.
That's that's a great question. I think
I'm
people
quite nervous, quite nervous talking in front of everyone.
so people handle it very differently. So remember, every brain is a fingerprint, because there isn't a present in the brain. Every brain is interpreting its entire world happening right now. And if it's running a deficit of a body budget, we can assume people are, then it's got very limited resources and capabilities. So if we're talking about family, we're talking about people in our circle. So the tool I'm about to give you really helps with that. Okay. And if we're understanding with empathy that that's where they are, and you're not expecting people to be where you are, right? Because that's not fair. They're not. So part of being human and having an empathy is loving people for where they are, even if they've done really violent, harmful things, to understand the power of being a human being, that we can heal ourselves, we can regenerate, means that none of us are stuck in this present situation, this present mindset. No matter who today, we can change ourselves to be a better person, right? We can change ourselves to heal. We can change ourselves. And so the belief and the power of understanding that we are remarkably neuroplastic gives us the ability to reach out in that human empathy to others, right? To reach across and say, hey, I really don't agree with anything you say, but you don't have to say that. You can say with love, right? You can come across with, wow, I bet they're really going through something. Like the story I told you about in the newspaper. It may seem trivial, but to reach out and go, wow, he's really going through something. If I were going through that, I would feel pretty shitty too, right? So to understand that someone is human and experiencing a very human situation, and that maybe if we were in that situation, we can say what we would be feeling or thinking either, because the brain has very limited resources. So to answer your question, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but the tool that I'd love to to teach is very different from what we would normally do. So how many of you, do you want me to teach it right now? Is that okay? Or did you want to do one more question?
Oh, I think we can go with the tool. Otherwise, we'll have more questions. But I think that's good. Unless anyone, maybe like, is there anyone who has like a pressing question? And on the chat, anyone? I mean, if you have a pressing question, you can unmute yourself. Maybe we take one last one, quick. Okay, I think we're good. So you can go for the tool.
So, and this might take us just a little bit, but you'll do it with a partner. So the understanding of we pride ourselves, how many of you at least would pride yourselves on saying you're a really good active listener? We like this term. We say that we're active listeners. Would everybody say that you're good with that? You're practicing active listening? Okay. If we're talking about co-regulating with another human being, that we're trying to get out of what we would consider a hyperconnectivity loop. So they're stuck in an imbalanced brain metabolic body budget. They're stuck in anxiety, depression, violence, anger. They're in a hyperconnectivity loop. Okay. So more on that later. So what you can do is very different. And it's called deep listening, because what's happening is, even though we say we're active listening is still not co-regulating listening. I'm going to say that again. You're actually still not co-regulating, because normally we're listening and the brain is listening for data, facts, information. We're trying to figure this one out, right? It's always trying to process the data to make a prediction so it can make an action plan. That's what the brain does. Data, prediction, action plan. We pretty much most of the time get the prediction wrong, because we're predicting our past experiences on other people. I'm gonna say that again. There's so much research that shows we are horrid at reading other people's faces, facial expressions, understanding, because we're predicting on that person what we think that face means for us based on our past experiences. So we're really bad at that. We should probably stop predicting so much. But what's happening is, if you can co-regulate listen, you call it deep listening or adaptive listening or regulating listening. And the tool I'm going to give you, you do it and you practice it with your eyes closed. But when you do talk to somebody in person, you should have your eyes open. But we're going to practice with our eyes closed for a reason. But what's happening is, even in active listening, you are actively listening. You're listening for emotions. You're listening. So we say we're trying to do it with empathy, right? But what our brain is really doing is still processing the data to make a prediction so we know how to act. It's still working on, what am I going to say next? How do I respond? What do I say? How do I de-escalate the situation? How do I, right? So it's active listening. You're listening for facts and data. Check. You're listening for emotions and feelings. You're trying to human connect, empathy. Great. Are you co-regulating? Nope. Because you're just listening for your own action plan. Even if the action plan is to help them, because you want to help them, it's still listening for an action plan. You're not co-regulating. So if you understand that what I just said is, when we're looking at people, our brain is predicting things on that person subconsciously. You're not even aware. And we're almost always misreading the situation. So it's really important that what the tool I'm going to teach you right now is called deep listening. So if there is someone that you have a real intense argument with, someone said, help me talk to my family. Yes, I'm with you. Okay. So how do you help talk to people who aren't in this space, right? And so what I'm going to ask you to do is, I'm going to do it. I want you to do it with me right now. So what I'm going to do is ask you to pair up with somebody next to you. Anybody next to you? Somebody. If you're home alone, I'm so sorry. Maybe we can co-regulate on the screen. We'll try. But to partner up with someone next to you. Do you have a partner? I see people not moving. Partner. Okay, Sophie has a partner. So I would love for you to pick who's partner 1 and who's 2. It doesn't matter. You're both going to go. I just need to know who's going to go first. So go ahead. High five. Partner 1, partner 2. Do you know who you are? Okay. How many of you immediately smiled as soon as you started facing that person? Did you? We're co-regulating. We smile when we're nervous a lot of times too, but we have different facial expressions mean different things. However, we mirror each other. So it's very fascinating. People hugging. This always happens. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, I'm going to ask you to listen to co-regulate. And that's a very different type of listening. Okay, because it goes back with the question she just asked. You're actually going to project something on the brain and tell it it's true. I'm going to say that again. You're actually going to tell the brain a story deliberately and believe it the whole time while you're listening to the person. Okay? Okay. So what happens is, what I want you both to do right now is, I want you both to think about something that you're super passionate about. Something, if you're like me, could be neuroscience. You will talk about this until nobody's listening. You're still talking. What is it that you're passionate about? Think about it. Get your thing. You got your thing? Could be anything, cooking, singing.
And Rebekah, do we have to tell the other person what it is?
Not yet.
Not yet.
You got,
okay, just
you got
in
your
our
idea?
mind. Okay.
In your mind. Good question. Okay. So you got it. You know what you're super passionate about, right? Okay. So partner 1, you're going to go first. But right now I'm going to ask you both to close your eyes. Some of you are going to have a hard time not touching the other person because you're just so desperate to co-regulate because this feels weird to you.
Okay, so we're not supposed to.
That's okay. You're trying to co-regulate. You can. It's all right. I mean, that's beautiful. If you can actually get somebody who you firmly disagree with to hold your hand in a conversation. Great. Okay. So what I want you to do is close your eyes. And the reason why you need to do this, and this is the reason why these type of groups are so powerful, because you practice these tools together to where it becomes so instinct in your brain that this is your normal way of behaving. right? But it's like working out. We have got to get together and practice our tools so our brain learns a new way of being. It needs a big toolkit, right? Okay, so if you close your eyes, you're silencing one of the brain's sensory data. It's easier for you to tell the brain a story if you're not giving it real data that can conflict with that, right? Which is why movies that are really visual and amazing, the brain, we love stories. We tell ourselves a story all the time. Everything in our head is just a story, okay? So if you can close your eyes, you're going to silence one of the senses so it can focus on just the listening. Okay. The more you practice this, the more you can keep your eyes open to a real person that you're having a conversation with, but you need to practice it this way. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now with both of you with your eyes closed, partner 2, you're going to be the listener and you're practicing co-regulating listening. So what I want you to do is right now, I want you to tell yourself that the person you're about to talk to is the most amazing, wise, brilliant, interesting human being. Really believe it. You tell yourself, I am about to have my mind blown by this amazing co-regulation conversation. I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to be able to have empathy. This person is going to just be amazing. And you just tell yourself it. And I want you to really believe it. Really believe that you're about to have an amazing conversation. And you're going to connect as a human being. Yes. You got it? Now, partner 1, we're just going to do this for a minute. I want you to talk, and you're both going to keep your eyes closed because partner 2, I want you to co-regulate. Literally envision yourself vibrating particles, breathing together, heart rate together. In your mind eye, I want you to co-regulate listen. And you're listening for who that person is saying they are as a human. It's not about the stories they're telling. You're trying to understand, what are they really trying to say about who they are? What are they passionate about? What's their purpose in life? What do they love? What's their gift? It doesn't matter if somebody's talking about fishing. You're listening for the human. You're listening for who they're trying to communicate they really are as a human being. Okay? Does everyone understand what's happening? So eyes closed. Partner 1, you are going to talk about whatever it is that knocks your socks off. And partner 2, eyes closed, you are co-regulating listening that this person is the most amazing person on the planet. Okay? Are you ready? You have 1 minute. Start talking. Okay, I'm going to have you stop. And now I'm going to have you switch. Okay. And it's okay. You can engage, you can communicate, you can touch, you can engage. So partner 2, it's your turn. You're going to talk about what it is you're passionate about. And partner 1, you are co-regulating listening. You are telling yourself the story that this person is amazing. They are brilliant. You are learning and you are co-regulating human to human. And you're really trying to understand who they are as a person and find that human to human connection. Okay? Ready? Go. Okay, I'm going to stop you. You can open your eyes. You can hug if you need to. Now, I'd love to ask if who wants to kind of share, what did it feel like to be the listener and to be listened to? Like what did it feel like for you? It's okay if it was different or weird. Yeah, what did it feel like?
So maybe, okay. Do we exchange with you, or maybe we can go around and
Yeah,
have,
that would be great.
yeah, I think we have a couple of people exchange. Yeah, so maybe in this group, actually, okay, Choka, you can go. We'll start since you're here.
Yeah, it was wonderful, actually, to hear in such a short snippet of time the real passion of who this entity is. Because having already known, we've never had this conversation. In all the time we've known each other, I've known this about her, but had not experienced it from her in this way. So I found that fascinating.
Amazing.
Yeah.
There's something that I had observed that was really wonderful. Being in a room with so many people who are actually in a state of excitement and passion, and as I believe we're all super sensitive here, it was super contagious because I could feel the whole room being like, oh, like a child, you know, and me myself, I started feeling like that. We were all in that state, so it was like almost amplified. So thank you all for that amazing experience.
Amazing.
It was good. It was really good. Like I could just see her on this big platform, just playing on music and just shifting. That's why I started crying, because I'm like, I seen her. Just, yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
I think you'll have to speak loud.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was really beautiful. I think normally for me, I'm hypersensitive to a lot of things.
Rebecca, can you hear?
Oh, you can?
Okay.
Yeah. I just muted myself so I can hear.
Okay. And so often I find that not just the person I'm talking to, sometimes I'm sensitive to like the whole space, not the people, just the aesthetics of space. And I can feel like sometimes the spaces within people and around people are closed off to a genuine heart sharing I find that I would immediately silence myself because we've all been conditioned to that, right? Something safe. But I think what was beautiful to experience was that this deep listening created this feeling of awareness, of feeling that I can hold myself in simultaneously, and that created like a really beautiful energetic of feeling like we could actually relate heart to heart, and that I could actually share from a genuine place without worrying about self-judgment and external judgment at the same time. So that was really beautiful.
Maybe Candace there. Yeah. Since you're here.
Do I want to share? It's such a good tool, actually. I think that if the whole world knew how to use this tool, like we would be in such a more peaceful place in the world. Yeah, I found myself, it was interesting. I found myself like, wow, yeah, this person is amazing, everything they're sharing, and it's like you feel it in your body. But then there was this little voice that was coming in, and I think that it was easier for me to say, oh, this is this little voice, and I was very empathetic towards this voice that was coming in. Whereas when there's that little voice in the background, like sometimes you might beat yourself up or you might get attracted to it, but because we were actively being, this person is amazing, you're changing that state so deep within that it's affecting everything within, even those little voices in the background. So yeah, it's a really great tool. I'm going to use this in my classes. Thank you.
No. Yes.
Yeah, Candice teaches Kriya Yoga amongst other things, and yeah, her sessions are amazing. By the way, for anyone who hasn't experienced them, it's just such also an incredible tool. Yeah. So maybe, yeah, I think we're almost at time. I mean, we could be here for long. So I don't know, Rebecca, if you had, so the way forward is like, if you have any last things to say, and then Suzanne will do the closing.
Yes, I just would kind of leave with that is, it's one of many tools, right? And it's the power, and I love it because sometimes I hear people saying they actually get like a visual, like you can almost feel and sense the other person's being, which is interoception as well, right? And so this understanding of knowing the power of the fact that our brains are telling us a story, and if we can begin to co-regulate, the power of feeling that energy and that ripple effect is phenomenal. And I wanted to kind of leave you with this little tidbit because someone just said it a minute ago, and I thought it was really, really great, which was, it was actually a Stanford study. And they studied, but basically they were studying this town that had over 5,000 people in it. And they studied them for 32 years. That is a long time to follow 5,000 people. And what they found was oftentimes they would give periodic like surveys. And what they found was the entire town, whenever one person was experiencing a mood fluctuation, so there was a happy mood or positive mood or maybe a negative mood, that rippled throughout the community. 5,000 people, every time statistically, they could map the power of co-regulation ripple. Even though those people may have not had any other interaction with that other person, it's almost like if you understand that we're always bouncing off of each other. And with each interaction, you're either putting in a deposit or withdrawal from some other human being. It's either gaining or sharing of electrons or taking away, right? So you're either putting or drawing. And then it creates this ripple effect, this continuum of co-regulation as a species. And so what I wanted to leave you with is this feeling of, yes, we feel it's powerful, or we know we could create a movement, but no, like statistically, it creates real actual change in people who don't have any contact with each other because of the co-regulation. And Facebook did it over 700,000 people, and it proved true via social media. So even virtually, if people saw positive feeds from their friends and family, they were 4 times as likely to begin posting positive feeds in their own story. If they saw negative feeds, they would respond negatively, right? So if you understand the power of co-regulation as a species and you start to develop these tools, it's not just grounding and healing ourselves, but the power of understanding that we heal ourselves for our future and our present and our past. And that ripple effect is phenomenal, how fast it can spread. If you think about what happens with a virus, if you can spread it in a powerful way, it doesn't have to take long. We're talking about healing wars and things. It doesn't have to take long. It can happen in months. It can happen rapidly, quickly, if we all really understand the power of a ripple effect.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. We're so blessed to have you here, part of the community. Thank you for all the knowledge. Thank you for all these years that you spent gathering this knowledge and still the work you do. So yeah, we'll be doing more.
I'll see you next Sunday. So yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Yes. And yeah, I think if the whole entire world could be, you know, as you were talking, I was like, wow, if we could create a movement where, you know, we're getting more and more people trained on just even that, it would make big change. So yeah, watch out. You know how it works. Anyway, so thank you so much. Bless you. Suzanne is going to do the closing. And we're grateful for everyone who's been here. I think in total we're like about 40 people. We had 20 people online. And I think here we're probably about, what, 20, 30? I don't know how many. Someone has counted. But anyway, so it's a good number already to start with. Yeah.
Rebekah, thank you so much. This was mind-blowing on so many levels. And I'm going to keep this short because it's a little bit late here in Bali, and I think everybody's ready for bed. And it's the perfect practice for all of us to carry. Rebekah had a long conversation and really bonded around our highly sensitive nature, and talk a lot about space, talk a lot about as much as we need each other for co-regulation, how much also space we need to take to ourselves. Like, it was the only way I actually could start regulating, is actually to spend a lot of time alone at home and allowing my body and my energetic field and my psyche to just slowly find its way and reference point and not take so much information. And so we're in a world of overstimulation, and like I kept saying the last years, like information overload. That was the word I was using for myself. So found really basic tools, but powerful, very impactful tools to empty. So tonight, right, you know, as amazing as all this information has been, but we can also, there needs to be a moment where we just have to let go of it all. The good interactions, the beautiful information we took in, and like our feeds and what we see and the pain, we can just need to let it all dissolve into source. So we're just going to take a moment and acknowledging this beautiful experience, and close our eyes and come back to the 0 point. Back to the emptiness. We just received so much, been stimulated in an amazing way. Stimulation is not always in a negative way, but it can be in a beautiful, positive way. But ultimately what we're yearning is to just come back to nothingness, to emptiness. Thing. Our nervous system, our psyche actually really craves to receive less and less and less and less information. So we can simply just intentionally close our eyes every evening before going to bed Every morning waking up, even from a dream state, every interaction we have, every meeting we have. I do this a few times a day, as Rebecca mentioned, to just simply take a moment and observe our energetic field, to understand how much information is in there at the moment. How much of that information is organic? How much of it is inorganic? Organic energies and inorganic. Being intimate with self and being close with self is power. So to always scan our body, scan our field. How full are we? Full in the sense of how much have you taken on? So just visualize everything falling away. All the voices, all the interaction, all the information fading away. Emptying, empty. You just can trust the intelligence of your body to do this for you. Because the body knows the way, the psyche knows the way to its optimal state. We just have to sit, stay quiet, and very effortlessly allow everything to dissolve back to it. All the stimulation coming to 0 point. Our field expanding, and the information has already lessened in color. Coming back. The beauty of these practices are that you can just trust the intelligence of your body to do this for you. Sometimes you can just lay down when you've tried everything and nothing can bring you to balance. You can simply just lay down in Shavasana and allow the body to regulate on her own, on its own. Knows the way. So we're coming back and we're getting ready for bed. A lot of peace and space.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week. We will have Erica Ford, and we're going to be in for a treat like tonight. Rebecca, bless you. Thank you, sister. And I love you.